Spider-Man. Oh my god, I'm so hyped for Spider-Man. Alright, 5-9 crew, Hayes Inc. here, and it's the season to talk about that jolly web-slinger Spider-Man. So, right off the back of Miles Morales lighting up the PlayStation fans' lives on consoles, the news keeps rolling in about Mr. Parker's upcoming adventure on the silver screen. So, I've donned my web shooters, snared a few of my buddies here at 5-9. I've got Clerk with me today, I've got Lethal with me today, and I've also got Nolar with me today. And we're going to sit down and talk about Spidey's adventures, both big and small. So join us as we take a look at how Spider-Man has made the leap from comic book icon to a movie and gaming megastar. So we're going to start off here by talking about the early years of our favourite web slinger. Now, Spider-Man obviously got his start from pen and paper and comic books, but I'm sure some of us here found Peter through other avenues. Nolar, I'm going to start with you. How did you first discover Spider-Man?
All right, so the very first time I ever knew about Spider-Man was my older brother. He's 11 years older than me, and when I was, I think, 5 or 6, so he was a teenager in high school, he started collecting comics, and I, by mistake, ravaged through his box of comics and found the Spider-Man ones, and the one that I got was like a limited edition foil one, and I was just putting my greasy hands all over it, and my brother's yelling at me and whatnot, but that's when I like this guy's cool, he looks like a spider, and I'm 5 and 6, and I'm reading it, and there was this one issue, I forgot which one it is, but it was basically Spider-Man versus Wolverine, and they're fighting each other, they're fighting over a gravestone or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but I've always loved Spider-Man from then on. And right around that time was when for the US people, it was like Fox Kids, and then up there in Canada, where I grew up, was YTV, Youth Television. They started airing the early 90s Spider-Man animated series. And I think that's now on Disney Plus. So every once in a while I go back to Disney Plus, watch a few old episodes because it's nostalgic. It's like that was so cheesy. It's such a kid-friendly thing, and I laugh at it now because it's like, man, this is so cheesy. But back then it was the greatest thing ever. So that was my first exposure to Spider-Man as a whole. And ever since then, it's just been a long love of Spider-Man in general. So yeah, that's me, Hayes Inc.
Well, your love of music as well. I suppose you probably like the intro to that 90s Spider-Man. I'm sure there's someone famous that done that. I don't know who it is, but the that one. I think there's some famous songwriter that actually done that. For me, it's a little bit different. I'm going to throw it over to the other guys in a wee second, but I just want to kind of put my own thoughts out on it. I was pretty much like yourself. I did do, well, you're like your brother actually. I done the whole collecting of comics and stuff, but it was actually my dad that got me into Spider-Man. He used to be into Silver Surfer comics and stuff like that, and his second favourite comic book hero was Spider-Man, and it really resonated with me because he used to watch the cartoon from the 60s. He would have them whenever they were on TV. He would show them. He had the 80s cartoon. There was a weird Spider-Man cartoon where he basically shared a flat with Iceman and Firestar, I think her name was, and Iceman was voiced by the same guy that done, I think it was Shaggy and Scooby-Doo. No, it was Fred. It was Fred from Scooby-Doo, and it was really weird because they were on a college campus and it was just pure strange. But much like yourself, I really heavily got into Spider-Man, and I started collecting comics myself in the 90s, and the 90s animated series for me was at the time what I considered to be the best Spider-Man. Basically the best Spider-Man medium out there for me to kind of fall in love with the character the way that I did. Now, obviously, me and you are a little bit older, Nola, so I want to throw it out to two of the younger guys that's here, Lethal and Clerk. When did you guys become exposed to Spider-Man? What was it that done it for you two?
So you want to go first, Lethal?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick because you guys pretty much covered it. For me, it was the 90s cartoon. I was a kid. I just remember waking up, and I think we said it was a WB Kids Fox or something like that.
Yeah,
it was on one of those channel networks. Yeah, I think it was on that one. But yeah, I just remember waking up, and it's that theme song. I mean, Hayes Inc. just sang it for us, but it was like that, and I remember just that alone got me hooked onto the show. Yeah. But I think because I was such a kid when I watched it, but I'm pretty sure just the style of the show too. It was action, but it had little narration moments with Peter like talking. So like I feel like just it was something different from what I was used to watching. And obviously, like besides that, like just the action in the show and in the characters. I mean, that was the first time I got into Spider-Man. But I would definitely say, like I like Spider-Man, but I really didn't get more invested into it until the later years, to the 2000s with the movies. But that was definitely my first instance like with Spider-Man. I think even around that time they might have had some. I don't know why, but I feel like I remember Spider-Man being like. Was he ever crossovered into other old cartoons at the time? I feel like I've seen him before, like another one, maybe X-Men one or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
crossover there.
Okay, I thought so. Because I was saying, I feel like, I saw that show, but I feel like he just kept coming around. Like he was like a revolving character that you would see cross over into sometimes like the X-Men shows and whatnot, or something, other Marvel shows back then. But for sure, that was like my first time I've ever seen it. But yeah, I definitely like Spider-Man since then.
What about you, Clark?
So for me, I'm fact checking myself real quick. Okay, I had to figure out when Ultimate Alliance 1 came out.
There you go.
I probably, I'm assuming I'm the youngest one here, right?
Yeah.
So I was 4 years old when the Raimi put things into perspective. So I think for me, it had to have been reruns of the old cartoon before the movies came out.
Yep.
I think that's probably where I got my start. Saturday mornings, me and my dad would watch cartoons all the time. So I'm sure at one point, Spider-Man had to have come on, and I think I fell in love instantly with the character and the franchise. And then the movies are where my, I think, real love for this character came in. But we'll get to that in a little bit.
We'll touch on that in a little bit. I think it really resonates with kids though, because it's the same. I've got two sons, and immediately they were just drawn to Spider-Man. Maybe it's because when they were 1 year old, I used to put it on TV and force them to watch it. But it was an excuse for me to rewatch it. It's like, let's watch this, and they're sitting there sucking on a dummy, thinking, huh? But did any of you actually get to experience the first live-action Spider-Man, which was with Nicholas Hammond? It was weird because there was no actual Spider-Man villains in this. It was Spider-Man. They'd got the license for Spider-Man, but no one else. So he was like going out and solving normal crimes and stuff. Did any of you actually get to see that?
Real quick, I swear, you guys ever see that like that meme gif or whatever that goes where it's like the Spider-Man looks at the other Spider-Man, but it looks like it's a very old cartoon. Is that one or no?
No, that's the 60s.
No, this one's live action.
That's live action.
Wait, live action?
Yeah,
there was a live action
Spider-Man. Yeah.
Oh, never mind. I think it was just forget it then.
I think it was the 70s, and you may have seen clips of it where Spider-Man's basically been pulled up the side of a building by two ropes. His hands are clearly not touching the walls, and he's like, shimmying up this wall. Do you know what I mean? It's awful. It is awful. But I don't know if any of you had maybe seen it.
No, I haven't seen it myself. But yeah, go ahead, Clark.
I helped kind of clear up the script for this video a little bit, and I saw this and I had no idea that this had happened. And so I went and I looked it up. I couldn't find like an actual serious video, but oh my god, is this just garbage, dude?
Yeah.
They try to do a thing where he flips the web and he does the gesture, and then it takes like half a second for the web, and it's just immediately attached to the other guy. Like it's just super goofy. The costume is terrible. It looks like 6-year-old's Halloween costume made by mom, type of thing.
It
was hilarious. I loved being able to look back at that. That was funny.
I'm glad you looked at that up. A wee bit of research there, so it's good that you done that. One of the things that obviously we really focus on here at Five Nine Gaming, people might be wondering just now why we're talking about movies, we're about games, but we're obviously talking about lots of different things. But let's talk about the games. Now, obviously, it'd be quite surprising to some people to know that Spider-Man actually had 22 games that came out before 2002. Now, for somebody like Clark, that's probably 22 games that were out before he was even born. But he was out on platforms such as the Atari, the NES, Super Nintendo, Mega Drive. Did any of you guys, Sega Genesis to the American audience, did any of you guys have any experience of playing these older games? Did you get a chance to try them out back in the early days? Go with you, Nolar, because again, you're the old man here, so we'll start with you.
So I'm looking at the list right now. The one that I remember the most was the 1994 Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage. I played that game to death. I think we rented it from Rogers video store, and then I had been playing it for so much for like 2 days that I told my dad, like, we just need to buy that. So we ended up buying the game instead of renting it. And guys, this was the 90s when you rented games and you took them home and then you gave them back. It's not like what we are today. But so that one I played to death, and that's where I actually really like the symbiotes of Venom and Carnage. And really fell in love with that whole like side story of what they're doing. And I think that's around the same time when I remembered like the cartoon was getting into that whole saga of the black suit Spider-Man followed by Venom and stuff and Carnage. And so I was like, oh, this was just great. This is like, I saw this on TV. Let me go play it on the game. So that one's the one I remember the most. Some of these other ones, like, don't really remember them. I mean, I played a bunch like on the Game Boy. I'm pretty sure I played like the Amazing Spider-Man 3 Invasion of the Spider Slayers. Is like some cheap knockoff like back in the day. But yeah, that's my experience with playing the games. Maximum Carnage, man. That was awesome.
Well, again, maybe this is me showing my old man card because I am actually the oldest person here. I've played quite a lot of them. The first one I remember playing was Spider-Man Kingpin. It was on the Mega Drive, and I actually hated it. The reason I hated it is because it was absolutely brutal. I mean, it was so goddamn hard. I mean, you're a wee kid. There's nothing worse than just hitting a wall and you're like, oh my, why is this game so hard? He was also in Shinobi. A lot of people don't know this. He was in Shinobi. Basically, Sega ripped him off and they had him as a villain in the game and they had to go back in. He was weird in Shinobi. He started off as Spider-Man and he would then morph into Batman. It was like, what? And obviously, at that point, Japan didn't care too much about copyright, so when it got ported to the US, they had to change that. But that's a wee Easter egg there for people that don't know. But I also played a lot of the games. I played Maximum Carnage. I played the PlayStation 1 game where anybody that's played it will remember you could literally web sling along the sky, so there's like nothing there. You're swinging between buildings and there's nothing above you, but Spider-Man is literally swinging from clouds, you know. And that was, while it was enjoyable for people, it was bad because Spider-Man shouldn't be able to do that. So that's just a wee tidbit from my memory. So I asked Lethal the first time, I'll ask Clark this time. Clark, what about yourself? What's your earliest game that you can remember actually picking up? Obviously, if it's not too early, don't jump ahead because you know what's coming later.
Yeah. Well, no, I remember playing Spider-Man on the PlayStation. It might have been after 2002, you know, it might have been later down. Yep. But I definitely remember playing that. And then I do have Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six for my NES. It's like 15 feet away from me. And I booted that up. You know, these games don't hold up as well.
No.
So if I was to rate it, it'd be pretty low. But I'm sure at the time I would have enjoyed it a whole lot. Just like a lot of these games. And I remember playing Spider-Man on the Game Boy. Couldn't tell you which one it was. But there is a magic to Spider-Man games that even though these weren't like, you know, industrial revolutionizing games, they're always super fun though, just because of the core mechanics of Spider-Man.
Yeah. And Lethal?
Yeah, so for me, like, I'm looking at this list and I'm like, okay, yep, jump all the way to 2000. So here we go. Spider-Man for GameCube, because I remember I was a big GameCube kid at the time, and I think like Claire said, like, I feel like I had one for Game Boy, but like it must have been like a 2D side scroller type of game, I think. But I honestly have like no real memory of that besides like that picture. That's it. But the one that I think about the most is like Spider-Man. I think it was the one for GameCube, Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. Again, I don't know if I got it right when they released. I just remember being really big into the movies at that time and then being big into Spider-Man around that time. But my biggest fondest memory was like, I think it was like using cheat codes and like you were able to change your outfit in like Spider-Man. I think it was the first one, or that it might have been the second one, but I remember being able to like change your outfit and play as like the different costumes. Like you would literally still web sling, but you could have Shocker. It made no sense, and I was just like, this is amazing. And you do it with like Mary Jane Watson, a bunch of other people. Like it was just like funny things like that I remember just enjoying it so much. And I think at that time too, like for me, as early as into gaming as that was for me, I'm trying to think. I think that had been one of my first like sort of like, you know, open city type open world kind of vibe that I could have ever experienced as a kid. Because I remember like web slinging through, you know, this city, and like you could pick up, I think, quests on the street. You could like save people from like buildings or something like that. I feel like there was tons of different quests like that. And I remember I think it was one of the boss fights for like Spider-Man. I think it was the first one. It was Green Goblin. Oh my god, dude! I had the hardest time as a kid trying to do that, because before you fought Green Goblin, I think you had to chase them around the city first for like a little bit. There's like a segment where you have to chase them or like stay up to them while they like escape or whatever. Dude, don't even get me started. As a kid, I remember going crazy. Like there's just no way. And then I finally beat that thing, and oh man, it was such a good feeling. But definitely like for me, it was like the GameCube for like Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 for those games for sure.
Well, the best thing that you've done there is you've offered me a really great segue, because what we're about to dive in just now is basically talk about, as Spider-Man became a comic book and Saturday morning cartoon sensation, the world did wonder when we were actually going to get a good version of Spider-Man in movies, you know, because obviously I've mentioned Nicholas Hammond was a bit of a disaster. Basically, we hadn't really at that point had the chance to play a decent Spider-Man game either, and both of these would come at the exact same time. So Sam Raimi would come along and he dropped 3 cult Spider-Man movies at the same time. Well, not at the same time, but in the same sort of era. How did you guys feel when Spider-Man was finally on the big screen? What was the kind of best moments in those movies for you? What did you enjoy the most? As you kind of already let us know that you enjoyed them, on you go, Lethal. What was the best part of those movies for you?
I mean, and for me personally, this was like, again, this is like my first real, like, I guess, relationship with Spider-Man, or like getting to really know Spider-Man. So for me, the biggest thing was like, it was like a brand new experience to me. It was a bunch of characters, you know, on a big screen that like I grew to love over time. I don't know, to me, I think learning his story, you know, like in that they portrayed in the movies and whatnot, like, you know, him going through all that he went through to become like the full suited figure of Spider-Man, the villains and whatnot. I think those are the best parts, is like, you know, getting to learn more about Spider-Man, like more about his enemies, more about his love interests, and all the, you know, story elements that come with Spider-Man. For me, those are the biggest things.
What about yourself, Clark?
Oh, dude, I think this is finally when my brain cells started working, you know. So I really enjoy these movies, man. They're a highlight of my youth, watching them over and over. Because, you know, when you're a kid, you get like 5 movies and you watch them 1,000 times, right?
Yeah.
So Spider-Man 1 and 2 were definitely some of them, and they were just so good at the time, you know. And there's so many good memes at this point. I could thoroughly rewatch these movies and enjoy it, you know. The character Tobey Maguire, I don't think I like Tom Holland a bit more, but I think he still did an amazing job of making Spider-Man feel real and alive on that screen.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed these movies, man. I think they hit the mark. We could talk about the third one later.
Yeah,
but the first two, I think definitely felt like great movies for the time. Maybe a little even ahead of their time, honestly.
Nola, as you probably are a bit older, and well, you are a bit older, by the time we got to
Just
the point
maybe.
of these movies coming out, you had them in your life, the character in your life, a little bit longer than these two. So what did it mean to you when you finally seen Spider-Man immortalised on the big screen?
So 2002 was when the first Spider-Man came out with Tobey Maguire. I was in high school. I think I was a sophomore. So, you know, like I said, I grew up reading the comic books, playing the video games, and like I had a lot of Spider-Man, but that was it. So it was just the video games and the comics, right? And it wasn't until like I think they announced it in 2000 or 2001 that they were gonna make a Spider-Man movie that like blew my mind, because I was like, oh my god, because in 2000 was when we had the first X-Men movie, and that was like the first time where we saw a really well done comic book movie come to the silver screen, right? That was the benchmark to be like, they can make good movies out of this. And then the next one to come out was Spider-Man itself, like with Sam Raimi. I was like, okay, I'm all in. I'm like super hyped, super excited for it. And at first I was like, oh no, we don't really need to hear the origin story, but I realized this is the first time he'd ever come to the silver screen, so sure, they had to go through that with Spider-Man 1, which was fantastic. But to me, my favorite one of the two, or I call it the two because the third one I don't even acknowledge its existence. The second one's the best one to me, with Alfred Molina being Doc Ock. Like Tobey Maguire, I don't think he's the best Spider-Man we've had so far, because we've had other ones. But to me, he's always going to be that initial actor that played it. You know what I mean? That role he embodied. That's what it is. There are different variations, like with Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield. They play different versions of him, and I appreciate that, because, you know, Spider-Man's been around for decades, right? And there's different ways to bring the character. So, but to me, it will always be Tobey Maguire being that initial Spider-Man. Kirsten Dunst, like, they were great. These were great movies. So yeah, I'm super happy.
See, for me, it was slightly different. By this point, I was heavily invested in the comic book collecting side of things. I had a massive collection of Spider-Man comics. I was deep into the lore. I knew the background, the characters, etc. And initially, I say initially, I was disappointed by the movie initially for a few reasons. Although I did enjoy it overall, I was disappointed with a few things. Like when it first came out, I didn't like the fact he had organic webbing. It really didn't sit right with me. I didn't like the fact that he didn't have web shooters. It was a big deal for me. I remember it a lot. It really, really annoyed me. I also didn't like at first the fact that they had Willem Dafoe in the kind of metallic-y Green Goblin suit, because I actually liked the normal Goblin mask. I think it looks a lot creepier, the way it's portrayed in comic book form and stuff like that. But obviously, I loved the film. I loved the first movie, and as time has went on, I can understand why they didn't do that back then, because a latex Goblin mask would have probably looked awful on screen. But at the time, I didn't like it. I'm still not 100% on the organic webbing thing. I still think that web shooters is the way to go, and I'm glad they've never done that again. But Spider-Man 2, yeah. I mean, despite the fact that I loved Willem Dafoe, I thought he was absolutely fantastic as the Goblin. Well, as Norman Osborn more than the Goblin, to be honest. I loved Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 just hit so many perfect notes. It's campy enough for a superhero movie at the time, because they were still a little bit campy at that point, which was good. I mean, it worked in that time. The action was great. The romance element worked, because let's be honest, Peter and MJ had a love story in the comics, so it's not unusual for that to be the focus on the screen. But Molina did steal the show as Doc Ock. That scene when they were in the operating theatre and he had just had the accident and his arms come to life, there's callbacks to the Evil Dead there and everything with Sam Raimi, with the way that the arms are chasing the doctors and stuff. He used the same kind of shaky cam effect that he used in the Evil Dead. Even the chainsaw bit when they're trying to cut it, that was a little callback to Ash in the Evil Dead as well. I liked how he done that. I thought, I don't want to say a masterpiece, because that's maybe pushing it a little bit, but it was a comic book movie masterpiece, I'd say that. It was absolutely fantastic. And I think at that point, people really did sit up and think, well, actually, hang on, they can actually make these things into top-notch movies. And I think that was the first one that really, really done that, which again is a perfect segue to talk about the games again, because funnily enough, while Spider-Man 2 was probably the pinnacle for the Spider-Man movies at the time, the standard was set in consoles when they brought out Spider-Man 2 the game. This game is the one that most people will remember as the first game to absolutely nail web slinging, and it gave you the actual feeling of being Spider-Man, of having the freedom to swing about and do what you want to do. Now, we already know that Lethal played the game, but did any of the rest of you play Spider-Man 2? Did you get a chance to actually dive in and feel what it was like to be Peter?
Of course, dude. This game was phenomenal. It set the standard for me of because usually movie games are trash, but movies based or games based purely off movies never really do good. This one was phenomenal for me. You said it set the standard for web slinging and what Spider-Man can be in a video game. It did. Honestly, it made open world a real thing for me, because at the time I wasn't playing huge open world games. But it kind of opened it up to me to where this is this genre, and they made it so well, being able to swing around New York City and stuff like that. This game hit all the points I think they were trying to hit, and it was just, at the end of the day, it was extremely fun. And we'll get into the PS4 versions later, but it made you feel like Spider-Man, and that's really all you had to do to make it fun. And they did. So
I take it you played this one as well, Nola?
Well, I didn't have a GameCube at the time, but I went to my buddy's place every few times to do it, and every time I went over to his place, I would play Spider-Man 2. So I didn't play I didn't go through the whole story, but just the 30 minutes in spurts that I get to play it, it was fantastic, because like you said, the biggest thing was it actually nailed what it was like to web swing through the city and feel like you were Spider-Man. And that was fantastic. I had never had that experience before. It was always side scrollers or RPG style stuff, but this one was hey, it's like you said, Claire, it was an open world where I could actually swing through things and feel like I'm playing Spider-Man, solve a crime here, do this, it felt really nice. And that set the standard, which is great. That's one of those games that if you're too young, you wouldn't even know this existed, but if you were old enough like myself or the rest of us here that managed to play it, you'd been this is where the standard of web slinging started.
Yeah. The thing about this game as well is I'm not going to ignore you here, Lethal. You've told us a wee bit about what you think about web slinging, so I'm going to ask you something else actually.
Yeah.
This was the first game that actively made me want to go to the top of the highest building, that wanted to make me go up to the top of the Empire State Building, go on top of this skyscraper, and it encouraged that by having these little tokens, but I didn't feel forced to do it. I wanted to do it. Did you have that same kind of experience with it, Lethal?
Oh, but dude, 100%. And again, like I mentioned this because again, I was a kid, so like these are kind of like the first games I really kind of played. And obviously, this is definitely like from someone for me at that age, a big jump from like your Game Boy Advance games, your Game Boy games to like your first kind of console kind of games. And so that's like a big transition, you know, when you're going from like, you know, like again, like this 2D kind of style to this big open world 3D. And so for me, it's like this is like I'm like in a candy store, you know. There's so many things I can do here that I could have never have done before.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like wanting to go ahead and like, you know, like swing to the top of a building, climb up, and like, you know, just do all different types of things that you could have never have done before in a game. Oh my god, do 100%. And I think another thing for me too is, again, I really correlate this with like the movies, because that's really my big experience with Spider-Man was like, you know, movies, and then like, you know, these games that were right inspired off of the movie. But they even had, if I'm not mistaken, didn't they have also lines? Would they had actual lines from the movie, or just recorded lines from the actors themselves that they used for this game too? Like
Tobey
that was
Maguire.
another big part that was, for me, it was, you know, actual some voice acting in the game, because I think was that introduced in this game, right?
Bruce Campbell was the narrator for this game. Bruce Campbell done all the narration lines, and he was like the overworld voice kind of thing. And Tobey Maguire actually recorded voice lines for the game. They weren't lifted from the film. He went into the studio and he actually recorded new lines for the game. So it's kind of funny that not only was this the pinnacle for like Spider-Man games, I do believe that it was probably critically the first movie tie-in game that was also successful. Clark kind of touched on that, but up to that point they were jokes, cheap cash-ins. This was probably the first one that not only was a great Spider-Man game, it was probably the first time you could go back and look and see that a movie tie-in had actually succeeded. But after every success, there usually comes a failure. Not all the time, but in the case of the Sam Raimi movies, it did happen. And the third installment in the Sam Raimi trilogy wasn't as well received as the first two. Did any of you actually enjoy this film? I'm going to have a bit of fun with this one first, and I'm going to ask Nolar, because he kind of touched on his feelings towards it. But tell us how you really feel, Nolar. What did you think of Spider-Man 3?
Okay, so I was super excited because they were talking about Venom. And I was like, I remember I told you, Maximum Carnage, that SNES game, I love Venom, I love Carnage, I want to see that. But when I was actually watching it, this was the first time where I literally, because I love watching movies, like I'm a big movie buff, but this was the first time where I was thinking, I need to walk out of here.
Oof.
Okay.
100%.
Like what, end of high school, beginning of college, I think, something like that. So yeah,
like I think it's 2007.
Okay, so that was college for me. So that was the first time where I was like, dude, I just need to get out of here. I cannot stand this. And the pinnacle of that was the dancing part. I just like, what the F is this? Like, the worst thing was the character developments. When you have that many villains, and I mean, we'll talk about this a little more, but like, it just felt like there was too much to do in such a short amount of time. They just failed to execute on every level that it just turned me off. I just couldn't watch it again. And even when they're on TV now, if you guys still have a TV, you know, cable and stuff, I just turn it off. I don't want to watch it because it's just the repulsive feeling I have about it. So go around to the guys, but there's some info I wanted to share.
Strangely,
about it.
before we jump off, I just want to touch on this. I cannot believe how much your story resonates with me, because that was me. I watched Spider-Man 1 and 2, the greatest films of all time. At that point, for me, it was amazing. They announced Spider-Man 3. I was with Julie at the time, and we were together, and we were like, right, we'll go and see this film. We'll go and see this film. It's going to be amazing. I was hyping it up for over a year. I went on opening day. I sat down to watch the film, and my world just crashed. I mean, I kept turning to look at her during the film to see, is she getting the same response from this film as I had? And like, there was points in the movie where I was sitting with my mouth like a gasp. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. And it wasn't because I was enjoying what I was seeing on screen. It was because I couldn't believe what I was watching. And we left the cinema, and people were saying, oh my god, that was amazing. And I turned to her and I literally said, because I hadn't asked her what she thought at this point, I turned to her and I said, did they just watch the same film as us? And she immediately responded. She went, it was utter garbage. And I'm like, I can't believe it was so bad. And ever since then, I've now had this thing where I try not to hype up a movie too much, because I still don't know, and from speaking to you, I now know that it's not the case. I always felt that I hyped that movie up so much. I expected it to be so good that it was never going to be able to deliver. But it turns out it's just a bad movie. Do you know what I mean? But honestly, my world was shattered at that point. I couldn't believe how bad it was. And yeah, no, Laura, I'm right there with you. I've actually owned Spider-Man 1 and 2. I won't buy Spider-Man 3. You know what I mean? It's like, I just act like there's only 2 films to that saga. So what about the 2 younger people here? I'm not insulting you by calling you younger, it's a compliment. What did you two think? I'll start with Lethal this time, because I started with Clark last time. Lethal, what was your thoughts of the Spider-Man 3 ending to the Raimi trilogy?
All right, so hear me out. Remember, I'm younger here, right? I'm not the guy who knows the backstories, you know, the comics.
I feel like you're going to say you liked it, and I'm going to have to
put your weapons down, boys. Put your weapons down.
Listen, I'm looking at the year. I had to look up the year for a second. I was like, okay, 2007. How was I? I think I was like maybe 10, 9, around there. Listen. I obviously I don't know too big into like story things, right? But I will say is I didn't like the ending because I wasn't a fan of how Harry dies. I didn't like that. That to me kind of really made me upset.
Spoilers, man.
I mean, this is 2007. I thought about that too. I was like, man, do I want to say this part? I mean, come on, who hasn't seen it at this point?
You're fine.
But no, dude, 100%. Like that part, I hated. But I will say, I love New Goblin, and I thought New Goblin was the coolest thing ever. I thought, like, you know, the glider to me was amazing. I thought his outfit was amazing. I thought that you know, like he had like a sword. I think it was like a cyber sword or something like that. Dude, again, me kid was like, yo, that's amazing. What I hated, which I can't say I didn't like, is like, you know, they made him as if he kind of forgot everything a little bit there. So I don't know how I felt about that part, but I was just happy to kind of see him team up with, you know, Peter Spider-Man, and that to me was like one of the coolest things ever. And I love a good, like, you know, team up type of thing. You know, to me that was just the coolest thing ever. And I did hate how it ended, but I mean, to sit there and be like, oh man, I thought, like, you know, this didn't make any sense. Like, I couldn't say that because I was so young, and so like to me, just seeing all those cool things happen it made my experience of it thing to be like really, like, I thought it was a good movie. But I will say, of course, I still hated that ending. But I mean, I won't say that, like, you know, I walked out of a movie theater or anything, because to me it was just an overall experience. I just, for the most part, I enjoyed it. But I mean, then again, yeah, there's the things I just didn't like about it.
Okay, so the one thing we have learned today is we can't invite Lethal to things anymore because he doesn't have any taste.
Come on, man.
We'll throw this over to...
A 10-year-old's not going to be like, man, I hate this movie, like, for certain things, man.
Well, we'll soon see what Clark's got to say. Clark, what was your impressions of
See,
Spider-Man?
I'm glad you let Lethal go first, so I don't feel as bad. Yeah, we were super young when this movie came out. So at the time, you know, like, I don't think I liked what they did to Peter's character. You know, it just wasn't well written, and obviously there wasn't enough screen time for me to care about any of the villains or you know, try and justify anything they did. It was just a mess. Looking back on it, I don't hate it like you guys do. I can watch it and just laugh and have a good time, but I do recognize it as a trash film.
Yeah.
They did a poor job of trying to, you know, get screen time for these 3 villains and make you care about them. I don't know, man. At the end of the day, I think I could rewatch it and laugh and enjoy it, and not hate it like you guys did.
Well, okay.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. No, I'm just kidding.
All right. I'll give them the pass because they're younger. You know, your tastes are a little different.
Thanks.
I'm sure your tastes have matured now, so they're
of
better.
Course.
But I just wanted to bring this in. So, like I said, I'm a big movie buff, so I know a lot about I know as much as I can, just as a movie buff, about the industry. So at the time, it's now recently come out that Sam Raimi, the director, knew Sony, they had a franchise in their hands, right? And they wanted to do spin-offs, and they wanted to keep the franchise going. But in order to do that, the studio itself had told Sam Raimi they needed to put Venom in, they needed to put Sandman, they needed to do all these things. They basically overstuffed the plot. And the problem was, in order to accommodate all that, Sam Raimi's like, we need more visual effects, we need more stunt actors, we need all this stuff. So the budget ballooned out of, like, control. So the case study of how to not screw up a budget, this is how it is. Where you're like, look, you don't let you should have the director be most creative control, because obviously studios need to have say something. They're the ones that put up all the money, right? But I'm like looking at it right now. Spider-Man 1 had a budget of 139 million. Spider-Man 2 had a budget of 200 million, and now Spider-Man 3 had a budget of 258 million. But the return on investment on that, like, yeah, they made some money off it, but it's not nearly the potential they could have had if they didn't interfere and balloon the budget and just destroy whatever Sam Raimi had in mind to just finish off the trilogy. So, Clark, you had something to say?
No, I was just agreeing.
Yeah. So.
No,
Yeah. Overall,
you're right, Nolan. I actually read that Raimi wasn't even familiar with the Venom character. He wanted to make it a solo film about Sandman, but they said to him basically, you have to have this character in it. And I'm sure I read an interview with Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane, to those that don't know, is the creator of Venom, who's now known for a lot of other things like Spawn and stuff like that as well, as well as McFarlane Toys, who make really nice figures. But he wasn't even consulted, as far as I can remember. I seen an interview and they didn't call him in. I think he felt a bit aggrieved by that, because obviously he created the character. Who's going to give him more information on him than Todd? But he wasn't really consulted or anything like that. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that you can take away from that is, if a director has a vision, if you believe in your director, you shouldn't start trying to pull the strings behind the scenes, because it's been shown throughout history of movies and stuff like that studio interference does not lead to a good movie. It just doesn't. More often than not, it leads to disaster. Now, speaking of disasters, strangely enough, after Spider-Man 3, the game was absolutely fantastic. Obviously, they were going to follow up with Spider-Man 3, the game. And it somehow managed to follow the movie's steps, and it was seen as a massive letdown. Now, despite the formula being there for great web slinging, they didn't have great web slinging in Spider-Man 3. Did any of you guys get I'm worried to ask Lethal now, but did any of you guys get the chance to try Spider-Man 3? What did you think of it? Lethal, don't tell me you got to go to Green Goblin, so you liked it. On you go, no, Lethal, actually, what did you think?
Actually, I'm glad you started me. You know why? Because I don't think I actually played this one. This is the one I don't think I played, but I feel like I remember watching friends play it, and I feel like this I think at the time was out for like Xbox, wasn't it? Like, was this next generation of consoles at the time? I think
it came out for the PlayStation 3.
I was gonna say this too.
Yeah, because I never played it. Unfortunately, I never played this one, but I remember watching friends play it, and I remember the graphics were like, this was like, again, an upgrade from one I've seen on GameCube. But I mean, the game looked cool for its time, but in terms of like gameplay and stuff like that, I actually can't even speak on that. But I'll just say that like the game looked cool, but I have no idea past that about the game how good it was. Hopefully, I'm guessing it doesn't sound like it did as good as maybe my Spider-Man 1 and 2 back from GameCube days. That's what it sounds like.
No, Claire, did you get a chance to play it, or am I the only one here that's played it?
You might be the only one, because I was off playing like Ultimate Alliance, having a grand old time with all the boys.
Yeah. Maybe that's what it was.
This might have come out right when 360 and PlayStation 3 came out. It might be.
No, it did. From what I can remember, I could be wrong, but I believe the PlayStation 1 was a special edition where you could go Harry. I don't think that was available on the Xbox One, but they were still doing that console exclusive thing where one would get special content that the other one didn't get.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've moved away from that. Not.
Yeah.
But no, have you not played it either? Am I the only one that's played Spider-Man 3 on console?
Again, the revulsion of the movie made me not want to touch the game at all. So
makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense, right?
You put up a hard stand against it.
Look, man, I just could not stand. I was like, what did they do to my beloved character and franchise? They just killed it. To be absolutely fair, though, just for you guys to remember, the PlayStation 3, like the font, is the same one they used for the Spider-Man 3.
Yep.
So that's how I remember they launched together at the same time. Because I was like, why did they tie it together? And I was like, Sony must feel real confident about that movie. And then I was thinking, well, they really screwed the pooch on that one.
I mean, it's literally called the Spider-Man font. You're 100% correct. That is the name of that font. I did try Spider-Man 3. I did play Spider-Man 3, and almost immediately it didn't feel right. When you've come from Spider-Man 2 that felt right, you then know what doesn't feel right, if that makes sense. It's almost like when you try a perfectly cooked steak. If you then start having steak that's not perfect, you just know. Do you know what I mean? So it was like that with Spider-Man. It wasn't the same. It felt sluggish. It didn't feel as good. You didn't have the same freedom. They should literally have just taken the engine and made the next game. It may have seemed like a cash-in, but it would have provided a better game. And sadly, Spider-Man 3, in a whole, gaming, movie, it was just a disaster. And really, at that point, it obviously sent things into a little bit of a tailspin for Spider-Man. So after the highs of the Raimi years, Spidey did become a bit of a wall-crawling menace with what was essentially a failure of a movie reboot, along with several failings on the gaming front. The only really thing that was a kind of shining light during this period was a cartoon series that was actually spectacular, pun intended, and many fans regard as the best animated version of Spider-Man put to the small screen. So, did any of you actually play any of the Spider-Man titles that came out between the Raimi movies and before the reboot? Did any of you get a chance to try things like Shattered Dimensions and stuff like that?
So I'll chime in here. Did Ultimate Spider-Man come out at that
Yes.
time? Because there was a comic book, it looked more like a comic book. That one, oh my! Again, this is I think GameCube 2 as well. This game was crazy. I just remember like the art style because it was so comic book. It was to me the coolest thing ever, and it was so colorful and it was so cool. And it had the same concept. I think you could still like go around the city and stuff like that. But this time, because I think it took place in a different universe, maybe, or regardless, the story it incorporated other Marvel characters, I believe. Because my biggest memory is racing. I think it's Human Torch. I think you see Human Torch and you race him throughout the city. And dude, I just remember loving to do that. And then they just like showed for me at the time it was like new villains. Again, I was still brand new, so that might have been actually maybe that could have been my first time learning about Venom. I think that sounds about right. That could have been my first time learning about Venom. But even more so in that game, I think you got to play as Venom. You did. Actually, I thought so. Yeah, you get to play as Venom, and like you get to use his tentacle attacks. Like again, it was learning more, like getting to learn more characters within the Spider-Man universe, and just that whole art style to me was just the coolest thing ever. That was actually the one that was probably my favorite Spider-Man game I think that I've probably played at that time, because again I had played the movie ones not too long ago, but that one, man, that was the one that stuck to me the most, and that's probably what got me really excited for like more of the movies and stuff like that over time. But 100% that one I know for sure I played, and that was a good one for me.
Ultimate Spider-Man's actually a great pick. The Ultimate Universe was one of my favourite universes. It basically took established stories and wanted to retell them, and a lot of the new villains you came up against weren't actually new villains, they were just remixes of existing villains, like they got their powers differently, they came out differently. But the Ultimate Universe was really good, and the cel-shaded effect really worked on the GameCube at the time, because that was a big title on the GameCube. What about you, Clark? Did you try any of the other Spider-Man games?
The one I remember most vividly out of all the options in between, because I think I remember playing a couple. I think I played Ultimate, but I definitely remember playing Shattered Dimensions. It came out in like 2010. I think I played it on the Wii, which is probably a terrible choice.
Probably.
Oh God.
Yeah, but it's what I remember it on. And honestly, at the time, I think I enjoyed it. It was the first time I've been introduced to what is it, Spider-Man 2099?
Yeah.
And you get the multiverse and all that kind of stuff. It really opened up Spider-Man to me as more than just Peter Parker. I think this is where I got my first introduction. Like, for Lethal, it was Ultimate. For me, it was Shattered Dimensions, where I was like, there is a whole lot to the Spideyverse, because I wasn't huge into comics, so I didn't know what all there was. So I think I enjoyed this because it opened up the world to me. I don't remember the gameplay being anything phenomenal. If I look back on it, it's probably like a 7 out of 10 game, a 6 out of 10 game, just a neutral game.
Yep.
But it opened up the Spider-Man world to me. And even the Marvel world in general. I think you get introduced to like S.H.I.E.L.D. in this game too.
Yeah. Yep.
So it I enjoyed it because it opened it up for me.
Nolar, did you manage to try any of them between the movies, the last Raimi movie and the upcoming Garfield movies we're going to talk about?
No, I was busy finishing college and then doing work. Like I actually played.
What a nerd.
I know. Seriously. I didn't actually play any video games at that time. Like 2-3 years was like a blank whirlwind of like, you do work and go to blah 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 blah. So I remember watching Shattered Dimensions, like the trailer reveal and stuff. I was like, hey man, that's really cool, I want to play that. Obviously never got around to it, so fortunately at the blank slate for me.
Well, there was quite a lot of Spider-Man games in between. There was stuff like Spider-Man Friend or Foe and stuff like that. They did do a lot of different Spider-Man games, but none of them really worked, again, for multiple reasons. They were either beat-em-ups, they didn't have web slinging, they just didn't really hit the mark. The first time it seemed like that might happen was when they done another movie tie-in that ties in with what we're about to talk about just now. So they basically rebooted the films, much to a lot of people's dismay at the time, and they brought in an actor that a lot of people didn't know, Andrew Garfield, and basically they rebooted the franchise. Did any of you get a chance to watch? We're going to focus on the first movie just now because there's a lot to break down here. Did any of you watch Amazing Spider-Man 1? What did you think of the first Amazing Spider-Man? Go with Nola first because he's the big movie guy here. What did you think of the first Amazing Spider-Man, Nola?
I actually quite enjoyed it. Was it as good as the Raimi ones? No, but I like Andrew Garfield's take on that kind of Spider-Man. It's a little different because he's a little more cocky and sure-headed. You know, that's what I mean by like they've got different. They write the characters differently with these reboots. Obviously, with Tom Holland, he's the nerdy kid. You know, not so full of confidence, like what I remember as the origins of Spider-Man. While this one's a little different, and since he's cocky, sure-headed, whatever. I'll play with that. I definitely liked him and Emma Stone's chemistry way more than I did like Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire's. So like that love story sold much better to me. But yeah, I mean, again, it's not the best of them. I don't think it's better than the Raimi ones, but this one was still pretty good to me. At least the first one. We'll talk about the second one later, but the first one's
you obviously think it was better than Spider-Man 3, though.
yeah, definitely.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, there's a lot of things that are better than this Spider-Man 3. Let's be real. So
it's funny that you should mention Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield's relationship on screen because I think they were actually a couple at the time, and I think it did translate to the screen, and you could kind of feel their chemistry. They did work really, really well together. So just focusing on the first movie again, I'll go with Clark this time. What did you think of it, Clark? Did you enjoy it?
I remember enjoying it. I couldn't even tell you who the villain for this one was. Did they use Goblin again?
No, they used the lizard. It was a lizard.
Lizard,
oh yeah, okay. See, now it's coming back. I do not remember a whole lot of the plot for this movie. I do agree that I think Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone had great chemistry. Their romance was really good. I wasn't a big fan of Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man because I do like the more awkward, nerdy, quirky take on Spider-Man. That's why I love Tom Holland. But it was still very good. It felt like they watched something like Iron Man. It was like, we need to make sure there's cool factor to our main character, and they got to be witty and a little sarcastic. And I think it kind of deterred a little bit away. But the movies were still good. At least the first one. I thought it was a very good movie. I think I'd rather rewatch the original series than this reboot. But it was still good. I don't think they failed on Spider-Man.
The only thing I would touch on there is I don't really think that was anything to do with Iron Man. If you actually read the Spider-Man source material, Spider-Man, when Peter is in costume, he is cocky. That is Spider-Man. I actually think they captured the element. And a lot of people would say that when it comes down to at that point, Tobey was the better Peter Parker. Andrew was the better Spider-Man.
That's what I was trying to say.
That's a kind of a common
wasn't my favorite Parker
argument. Lethal, what was your thoughts on the movie, the first one?
Yeah, I was actually just gonna pick up on just exactly what you said. I liked Tobey's Peter Parker, but I really liked Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. But I know for me too, like this is again when this movie came out, I believe like this is like I feel like an upgrade from like how the first couple Spider-Man movies came out that we just talked about. But like visually wise, like this was like a beautiful movie. I just remember so many highlights of like points where he just web slinging, and like there were so many cool moments. I wish I could remember one, but there's like one I think he was in the sky. I think like it was just it was such a cool visual take on it. Yeah, that's what it was. I think it changed to being more of a cinematic thing. And did they use CGI for it? Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Like, there's newer elements in these movies that like really caught my attention. I was like, yo, this looks so cool. And I just remember I did like it. Like, I didn't think these movies were bad. I mean, I enjoy them for the most part. But I think it was I think besides that though, I think my only thing that I was so confused at the time, because again, I still didn't know. Like, I'm learning more about like Spider-Man and like the different characters now. But at that time, like I didn't know who Gwen Stacy was, and I was like, yo, who the hell is Gwen Stacy? I was like, what's going on? But I remember being brand new, like, wait a minute, like this like to me,
this ain't MJ.
Yeah, I was like, yo, like this isn't MJ. Like they did this wrong. And I remember just walking around like, yeah, guys, like they messed up Spider-Man, because who is Gwen Stacy? Like I know at that point, like I only know Mary Jane, so I'm like, yeah, like I don't. Me and my friends were like, yeah, dude, I don't know. But I just remember like that being the big thing with like the Amazing Spider-Man series, because I just didn't know better, and I just didn't know, besides Mary Jane, Gwen Stacy and everything. But yeah, that was the only thing where I was like, man, that made no sense to me. But of course, makes sense now.
I think that's a completely acceptable, but because like most people that are into modern Spider-Man probably wouldn't know Gwen unless they had got into certain specific storylines where they brought her back, etc. But my only, I loved Spider-Man. I actually loved the Amazing Spider-Man. I thought it was great. I thought we were on to a winner with a new series. The only thing I didn't like about it was the fact that the Lizard looked like a Koopaling, or King Koopa or Koopaling from the Super Mario Brothers movie. They literally designed him to look like he was a Koopaling, and it's like, what are you doing? Because the Lizard, if you read into Spider-Man, the Lizard's a really complex character. He said a lot of character development in the comics from his move from Kurt Connors, the Family Man, to what he becomes when he becomes the Feral Lizard. They've never really went all in with that, and there's still a lot of potential to do a great Lizard storyline. I don't quite feel they've done that justice, but I did enjoy the first movie. And along with the first movie, they did release a game, and the game was kind of okay. I wouldn't say it was bad. It was better than what had come before. Nolar has already kind of told us he wasn't in his gameplay phase at this point. So did you or Clerk, did you get a chance to play the first Amazing Spider-Man game?
No, I actually didn't play these games.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go on Wikipedia and double check to see if anything, rings a bell. Maybe the first one. If they could be lost in my memory, but I do not remember playing these games at all.
Yeah, it's the same thing for me. Yeah, same thing.
Well, I did play them. I mean, they've basically got a bit of inside elements where it'd be like stealthy. It was like two games. You had the free-flowing web-slinging sections that tried to emulate Spider-Man 2, and then you would enter buildings, and when you entered buildings, it was about stealth takedowns and stuff like that. And it was okay. I wouldn't say that it was a bad game by any stretch. The second game wasn't as good, just like the second movie wasn't as good, but let's dive into that just now. So I'm going to give my opinion on the second movie afterwards. I have a sneaky suspicion Nolar's about to hit all the points I want to hit, so I'm going to let Nolar open this one up again, because he is more of the movie guy in this discussion. Nolar, tell the world what I think about Spider-Man 2, because I've got a funny feeling, we're going to be right on the same page here. On you go.
Okay, so I actually was excited for this because Jamie Foxx is a fantastic actor. And I thought he would do a very good job with Electro. And to be fair to him, he did the best he could with what he was given, which wasn't much. So overall, I hated this one just because there wasn't for me, a good movie is there's a good story to follow, and there's good character developments. And to me, and especially with like comic book movies or heroes movies, there's a hero's journey, right? And here they try to hammer that home, but they just didn't execute it. So by a hero's journey, that's basically like the hero in the beginning is not the same at the end. Something has changed along the way. Whether for in this case, Gwen dies. Spoiler alert for an 8-year-old movie, or 6-year-old movie. Anyway, so they're trying to change that, but I didn't feel that change did well at all. Like it just didn't execute to me. So off the bat, Andrew Garfield's character portrayal just did not work. And then Jamie Foxx, I was excited to have him there, didn't hit it home. On top of that, you had Green Goblin, which, again, you could do two villains in a movie, getting some storyline threads cross-referencing each other and then accumulating to something towards the end. Total failure of an execution. It just did not execute well here. Yeah. So for me, I see what they were trying to do, but again, this is where I feel like with Spider-Man 3, and in this case, Amazing Spider-Man 2, Sony was both feeling themselves too much, where they were like, oh, okay, people love our Spider-Man movie, let's just throw everything and see what sticks. And they just didn't actually go through the process of executing a fantastic movie. Had they done that and then worried about the third movie or a spin-off Sinister Six sequel, if they just cared about making a good movie from the get-go, they would have had me. But they didn't, and they failed. So that's my feeling.
See, just at the end there, you touched on my biggest problem with the movie. My biggest problem with the movie was I felt watching it, they were more concerned about setting up Spider-Man 3 than they were about delivering a good movie for Spider-Man 2. It was all about, at that point, they were really wanting to go in on this idea of a Sinister Six spin-off. They were wanting to make sure that they had laid the groundwork for Spider-Man 2, but Spider-Man 3, sorry. But if you've not laid the good foundations to a sequel, then the sequel's not going to happen. And that's what I feel happened with Spider-Man 2. What about you, Claire? What did you find went wrong with the Spider-Man 2?
You're right. The movie was about the Sinister Six and trying to set up for that, and it made the weight behind Gwen Stacy's death not important at all. It didn't impact Peter like it should have. Everything felt like it fell short. Of course, Jamie Foxx's character, there was nothing there, no depth to him.
No.
Everything was just underwhelming, and it's so sad. Like when you have a character like Gwen Stacy who dies, you should feel something. I was shocked that it happened, but like I didn't feel like Peter had really lost anything. Like his character was changing.
Yep.
And I don't know. It just all kind of felt short of what it should have been.
Hitting the right points there. Lethal, do you have anything to add, or did we cover it already?
Yeah, you guys literally covered everything. The only parts I ever can remember from that was like, all the Jamie Foxx moments, the Gwen Stacy death, and you guys literally hit every little point that I can remember. The only I don't know if was it in this movie? Did he have like a little segment where he was like skateboarding? Is that this movie? Or was that the last one? I just recall a certain part where he was just like skateboarding as Peter, and I was just kind of felt like it was so random. And I just hated it. But again, that's like
I
such a
think
little
he did have a
thing.
skate. I vaguely remember him maybe having a
He
skateboard as
just
Peter.
had like it was like just like a little random scene where he was just, I guess he was just stressed out, so he just skated. But to me, I was like, why is this in here? Like, I don't know, it just didn't really fit in. But at the same time, he did play that kind of different kind of Peter too, so that kind of could have went with that. But I mean, for the bigger parts that I could remember, it's like, yeah, like it was Gwen Stacy's death. I kind of feel like when I watched this movie at that point, man, I maybe I just started drawing out of Spider-Man, and like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's just something where I just didn't really. I watched it probably because I watched it with friends. Like, was this high school for me time? I don't know. This could have been something like where I was just going out to the movies to see it, but nothing really kind of. There's nothing big for me that really kind of stuck around too much. But like, yeah, just the moments that you guys honestly you captured the bigger parts of it. Yeah, and I remember the ending. But this was the one, right, that kind of wanted to set you up for the big Sinister Six, and that was probably the only part that I cared about. I'm like, oh, I was like, okay, like this is what was gonna happen, or this is what it's gonna go into. And I think for that point for me, I was like, oh, now I'm excited. But I mean, we all kind of can see where I'm sure Hazel will take us.
You're so weird. At that point, I had already checked out the door. I was like, no, it's gone. So in what was basically a bleak time for Spider-Man, because let's be honest, it was clear that there was another movie failure. There was one beacon of light, one thing that shined through that was actually amazing, and it was a cartoon that was shown on TV called The Spectacular Spider-Man that has one of the best intro themes to any Spider-Man song in existence. Did any of you watch The Spectacular Spider-Man?
Nope.
Yes, sir.
Clark! Yes, Clark!
So okay. This I would have never found this show if it wasn't for my brother. He would watch. Was this on like Disney XD or something? It was something like that.
I think it was. Was it not Fox or something? Because
it might have been.
I'll get into the whole thing at the end, but there's a whole thing. It definitely wasn't on Disney.
Okay. Man, it might be a different Spider-Man show I watched then, but there was it was around the same time period. My brother would watch this Spider-Man show, and I'm off playing video games in my room or something, and I would catch snippets of it, and I'd be like, that was funny. That was like hilarious. Or like that was a really cool scene for just a regular Spider-Man show. And I ended up just sitting down and watching it with him a couple times. I have to look it up and make sure I'm talking about the right one.
I think you're
but
talking
you can
about.
Go ahead and talk
I
about
think you're talking
I
about
loved
Ultimate
it.
Spider-Man. I've got a funny feeling you're talking about Ultimate Spider-Man.
Let me look it up.
Spectacular
you can go on.
Spider-Man was basically the truest rendition of any Spider-Man thing that had been put out. I mean, they kind of deviated a little bit, but they always made sure they hit the story points. You felt like you were watching an actual Spider-Man story being told and not some kids show. It had an overriding narrative that would continue throughout the show. It wasn't like Monster of the Week, even though you would have a Monster of the Week style thing. Behind the scenes, you had Norman Osborn pulling the strings as the Green Goblin and stuff like that. Unfortunately, what happened with that show is it was sadly ended because for Sony to keep the rights to the movies, they had to do a deal where they gave everything back to Marvel apart from the movies, and they gave back the rights to TV syndication, and they weren't allowed to make Spectacular Spider-Man anymore. And instead, Marvel brought out Ultimate Spider-Man, which is this fourth wall breaking kiddie.
Yeah.
It's still decent, but it
don't make
wasn't
me feel
to the
bad for
same
liking it. Come
level.
on.
I'm thinking that's the one that you liked. But what can I say? I like Teen Titans Go, and everybody thinks that's the worst cartoon show in existence. That's awesome, mate. That's a different show, though. We'll get into that one later. So obviously, I'm the only one that's a man of culture and watched the Spectacular Spider-Man. So I do recommend.
I need to go watch it. It looks like it's only 26 episodes.
It's awesome.
I might binge it.
It's awesome. Just listen to the theme tune if you get a chance. It's I don't know who done it. It might have been somebody daft like Sum 41 or something like that, but it's actually really, really good. So now we get to the meat. This is a bit that a lot of people are going to be interested in. Basically, Spider-Man wasn't in the MCU. The MCU was lighting up the silver screen. Fans wondered what it would be like if we could have Spider-Man in Marvel movies, but at the time we thought it's never going to happen. Sony have got them. And then out of nowhere in 2015, Sony come out with this news that they have teamed up with Marvel, and Marvel are going to be able to put Spider-Man into the MCU, and it would basically usher in a new era for Spider-Man. They would obviously reboot the show, reboot the character, and he would enter into the MCU. What did you guys think? Again, I know I'm doing this quite a lot with the movie stuff, but I just feel that it resonates with Nolan a little bit more than the game stuff. What did you feel when you heard that Spider-Man was going to be in the MCU, Nolan?
Okay, so you're right. We all were dreaming, okay, this MCU is fantastic, like the tie-ins, the cut-ins. We wanted Spider-Man, and we just knew it wasn't going to happen because, of course, Sony had the rights. And I just kind of wrote that off. Like, all right, well, there's always more characters to work with, right? You know, we could always get some unknown characters that people don't know really that well of to work with. And Disney, Marvel don't have to shell out a ton of money or do some kind of deal with Sony. But then, like you said, in 2015, we found out they're making a deal. It just blew my mind. And of course, like, yes, I was super excited, but I also was wary because I knew every deal has a deadline, right? There's a end date for it. So I was like, okay, how long is the deal? What kind of deal is this? Is it just for the MCU movies? Is he getting his own standalone movies? And then, of course, if they got standalone movies, Sony's producing it, Marvel's writing it. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that I was like in my mind as I was taking a look at the movie industry. I was like, this is huge. This is really haven't been done before, right? So I was super curious to go with it, and then when they announced it was, I think it was Civil War, right? Captain America Civil War when he showed up.
Yeah. Yep.
And when that teaser trailer showed up where he just catches the shield and lands on the car, it is like hi or
God.
Whatever the line is. It just blew my I was like having a nerdgasm. I was like, oh my God, he's in this thing! Like, this is so great. This is awesome, and I was super excited for it. And I was really curious because I was like, well, you're gonna like literally slot him into the MCU, so how are they going to do that? So their execution on bringing him into the MCU has been fantastic. Like, that's Captain America Civil War, the way they wrote him in. They didn't need to give a full like movie backstory. They just kind of said, hey, you guys kind of know what Spider-Man is, and then we'll just go from there. Great. And I love Tom Holland as the character because that is the character I know of Spider-Man. The nerdy, quirky kid, you know, with lack of confidence outside of the suit, you know, like that's the character that I read in the comics, watched grow up, and so I was immediately attached to his portrayal of Spider-Man.
I would. Maybe this is time to enter in the debate. I don't know, but obviously, you know, it's a hotly debated subject, and what you've just touched on there, I would agree. For me, Tom Holland nails it. As much as I love Toby, as much as I enjoyed Andrew, Tom just is the total package. He just nails it as Spider-Man. He nails it as Peter, and I think what he's done with the character has been fantastic. He embodies it as well, the way he promotes it, the way he deals with kids and stuff like that. And you see him going to have like meetups at hospitals and stuff. I know all actors do this, but it's just, I don't know. He just feels like Spider-Man for me. He really does feel like Spider-Man for me. What about you, Lethal? Would you agree with that? I mean, obviously you have now explained you've watched all the Spider-Man movies. Where does Tom sit for you with regards to Spider-Man?
I think for me, I agree. I love Tom Holland Spider-Man, but for me, I think it's always hard to kind of like move past Tobey Maguire because like that was my Spider-Man growing up.
Yep.
So I think there's always going to be like that emotional kind of connection, just like that nostalgic thing that just won't ever separate me and be like, Pat, like like say that like Tobey is whatever. Like I just feel like he's always going to be kind of my Spider-Man. But of course, like I'm just going to say like I still love Tom Holland's performance. I still love his Spider-Man. I love his Peter Parker. I love everything because at this point, I'm older. I mean, now I just watched his movies not too long ago, but he fits the Peter Parker for me now. Like when I learn more about Peter Parker now, and at this point I've looked into a couple comics and whatnot, like yeah, I agree. Like I just think he's perfect. And just like what Nolar said, man, that entrance, how they brought him in, and it was the Civil War movie, dude. That was so cool. And I was kind of, at this point, I think Spider-Man was out of the spotlight to the point where when he came back, it was like perfect. Like it hit me where it was like, oh hell yeah, like Spider-Man is back. Like you're like, I mean, like, like I said, it's been a while since I got into Spider-Man, whatever, at that time. And for him to come back at that time, I think was just perfect timing. And it just got me back invested into Spider-Man. And I just remember watching that first movie and oh my God, dude. Yeah, it was good. I think when they brought him back into the MCU and there was a whole debacle of like, will he come in? Are they going to do it? Because they're setting up to, make these Avengers and, go all in and everything. And I was like, dude, when they brought him in for that moment there, it was so good. And he just has like those lines, those good lines, dude. It was good in that Civil War moment. It was really good.
Yeah, and what about you, Clark? Do you have anything to add to just the overall when you get introduced? Do you think that Tom does hit the notes as Peter on Spider-Man? What do you think?
Oh, I love Tom Holland Spider-Man. And there's like a disassociation for me, as like the Spider-Man that Tom Holland plays is different from the Spider-Man that Tobey Maguire plays. Like Tobey's feels like more like, I don't know, like real world, grittier, I guess is the word. While Tom Holland makes it feel like a cartoon, I feel like I'm watching a cartoon version of Spider-Man, even though it's live action. And I think he makes it feel alive and like a different character. So I love Tom Holland's version. And honestly, during Civil War, this is when I first started getting into reading the comics and stuff like that. So I read Civil War maybe a year before the movie came out. And Spider-Man plays a really good role in that comic book series. And so it was exciting to be like, this is a character that I want to see and get to see it get announced and see that trailer. It was just so satisfying as a nerd to get that payoff, that release. So I was super excited.
I kind of know where you're getting the whole cartoon style thing from. I can't remember who it was that wrote it, but when they made the first Spider-Man standalone movie for the MCU, I think it was heavily inspired by John Hughes and like Breakfast Club and stuff like that. So they kind of did try and go for that kind of comedy high school vibe, but it was still a serious movie, and I think it translated well to screen. Nolar, you probably know more about what I'm getting at here because I know you're right deep into your filmmaking side of things. But that's kind of what they went for with that movie, and I feel that it hit really well. Just quickly, I want to ask, what's been your standout so far? For me, I'll say straight away, it was Infinity War. Just for everything Infinity War encompasses, and I think Peter had such a good role in that movie. It was so great. Never mind how it ended, because that's still news, so we won't spoil that. But I think he had some of the best scenes in that film, and I really, really enjoyed him in Infinity War. But what is your favourite moment in the MCU for Spider-Man so far? I've started with Nolar quite a lot, so I'm going to go straight to you this time, Clark. What was your favourite moment so far?
I feel like Infinity War, is a big moment for him because they made Spider-Man more of an innocent character. He develops this relationship with Tony as a mentor and a student, something that we haven't seen in any of the other renditions of Spider-Man. He's just kind of a solo. I got my family, I got my love relationship, but I don't have like a mentor.
Yeah.
Somebody that guides me. And so they play into that in Infinity War.
Yep.
And seeing that side of Spider-Man, I loved. That's my favorite side. There's just so much development. You get that hero arc that Nolar was talking about earlier.
Yep.
That you don't get in the second reboot of the franchise. You get that in this Spider-Man. So that's been my favorite thing, is to watch him actually grow as a character.
What about you, Lethal?
So it's funny because I agree with that whole thing. And in fact, that's kind of my feeling with him too. But I think for me personally, I mean, I got it from that movie, yes. But I think I got it more so from his second movie that he released. I think it was Far From Home.
Far From
I think,
Home, yep.
yeah, I think in that movie for me, that story was another one where it was like, he wants to be Peter too. It was a big thing of like, you have this big responsibility. You do have this big thing as being Spider-Man. And I feel like that was for me, his kind of breakout thing where he's like, okay, you know what? Like I do have this big responsibility. Like, I have like this duty to kind of do, and just all that, that whole story. For me, I felt that, but I felt it for that movie. And for me, I really like that movie a lot. I don't want to get into spoilers because I don't want to do that. But I mean,
Yeah,
for
it's
me,
still quite new.
yeah, exactly. So like for me, just that story of like him becoming into his own, I really felt it in that movie.
Nola?
I'm gonna take a different take. Instead of a encompassing thing, I'm gonna take one particular scene, and it's the scene in Homecoming when he's buried under the rubble, and his face is like
that's a
half,
good one. Yeah.
and when he's just trying to pump himself up, and he's trying to encourage himself to get out of the situation, and then realize maybe he doesn't have the gall. That like encompasses Tom Holland's acting in particular, because he really makes you feel like the despair in that moment. Like, can he do this? Can he get out of this situation? So I really enjoyed that particular moment from him, because that's what Spider-Man is. It's just, he's a kid. You just realize in the whole moment he is just a kid trying to make it through, but he's got to take on these adult responsibilities and leave his childish behavior or his thoughts behind and push through to be the hero that he should be. So that particular scene is a shining moment for me, because I always remember that. I was like, damn, that felt it. Like I felt that one real hard. So
That's actually a really iconic scene from a comic, and it's they played it really. They played it really, really well in the movie, I must say. So that's a great choice, Noah. So during this period, Spidey made the jump back to comics, and I can already hear Lethal rubbing his hands together. And what is basically, I think we can now all agree, is Spidey's definitive moment, and he made the jump back to consoles exclusively on PlayStation, which is upsetting for a lot of people, but at least some of us can get to enjoy it. What did you think of the first PlayStation 4 title for Spider-Man from Insomniac Games? Lethal, I know this one is the one you've been waiting for, mate, so let rip.
No, oh man, dude, that game. Oh wow, that like, there's a reason why I don't want to. I know that game won a big award, and I don't want to say it because I had to fact check myself, but that game won a lot. It had a lot of good praise for it, and rightly so. That game was phenomenal when I played that game. Besides having like the big visual the big visual upgrade of how beautiful that game looked, that game had a lot of gameplay elements I just thought were so good. I mean, they had some of that stealthier aspects to it, but for me, like the actual combat in that game to me was just, at the time, I just thought it was so cool. I mean, there was other games that were kind of similar maybe, but I mean, it's just the way they did a lot of the moments of like, I think they had like takedowns, the way they executed it, the way they had like some of like the visuals for it, like the zoom in effects and whatnot. I mean, there was a lot of things for that game that I loved, but for me, I was really happy because they took a storyline that I don't know if that came from a comic book. I can't say that part, but to me, it was a brand new storyline that I wasn't, I mean, characters, yes, but the way things kind of panned out in that story were different for me. And it was that ending of that game that really hit me well. And I just think they just executed the story so well. All the side content, all the extra DLC they added and they expanded it to it. I just thought it was so good. I was just glad to kind of see it come back to consoles. And more importantly, I was kind of glad to see them keep that open world feeling to it, because again, that was a big one for me back on GameCube. So for them to kind of still continue it in that aspect and just enhance it and add more to it, do some different cool things with it, man, it was like next level for me. I loved it.
Yeah, they did really well with that. I must admit, they actually did a fantastic job,
So
especially with stuff like the web slinging as well. They got the web slinging was absolutely nailed in that. But Claire, again, go back to you this time. What did you feel about the Spider-Man PlayStation game?
Dude, it was such a good return to form of the good how a Spider-Man game should be. Swinging around as Spider-Man has to be in my top 5 like favorite video game experiences. And it stayed that way ever since I was young, playing it on the PlayStation 2 up until playing it on the PS5 right now. That feeling just doesn't go away. Yuri Lowenthal does an amazing performance as Peter Parker. It's just a very well made game. Sony usually nails it out of the park with the exclusives, and they did with this one too. It was just such a good rendition of Spider-Man. It didn't feel like they really missed out on any beats. The gameplay was great. I just have nothing but praise for this game series.
Yeah, I mean, I loved it as well. I've not had a chance to try Miles yet. I'm going to pick up Miles I'm going to get the Ultimate Edition for the PlayStation 5, so that I get the
Nice.
remastered. I want to get the remastered version of Spider-Man 4, despite having it with all the DLC. I want to try the new elements like the 60 frames a second and stuff like that, because web slinging was so fluid and 30 frames a second. I can only imagine how amazing it actually
yeah,
is in
it's
60
phenomenal.
It's gonna
frames a
be
second.
so good.
I mean, but yeah, did any of you guys get to actually try? Yous have got it. I can just tell with the tone in your voices. Yous have got it. Don't make me feel too bad. But how is it? How is Miles?
I could jump into this. Claire, did you play it as well?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. I mean, we're not gonna touch spoilers or anything, but I mean, that game. I mean, as simple as it is, like that game took what was so beloved in Spider-Man for PS4 that came out, but like turned it up a notch. Like, in my opinion, I didn't think you could like go up a notch from what that last game gave us, and for me, it did. There is, I mean, I feel like the biggest thing for that game. I mean, of course, the story was just as good, I thought, and as the other one. I know it was a little bit of a shorter game, but I still had that same impact from a Spider-Man game. I just think the writing was done so well. But for me, I know it was like that turn up of like the visuals in that game. They had, this is where you were getting some ray tracing moments. You were getting a lot of new technology that was added into it. There was some haptic feedback going on when it comes to web slinging. When it came to web slinging, for me, I feel like I experienced it.
There's a little bit.
Yeah, there's a little bit of it. I wouldn't say there's a lot of it, but I mean, I felt it. I felt the little things that they did add into it. But again, it just felt like they cranked up a notch from what you got from the PS4 Spider-Man, and it was just you could tell, you could notice it. It looked beautiful. Again, like I said, it looked much more beautiful. And the story to me was still, the writing, everything was still just as good. It was everything I could have asked for like an extra. I don't want to say like a side story, but for giving Miles his own story and his own game, I'm glad they did it, and I just think that they did the smart thing of like taking what they did for the last one and just, I don't know, the best analogy I can give is like turning it up a notch, because that's how it felt like to me. Like that was I'm sure Clara can expand on that.
Yeah, they really did. They didn't mess with the engine too much. They just upgraded it, which is all they really had to do.
Yeah,
and it's phenomenal. It feels so good swinging around the city. That's what I spent most of my time doing, was just swinging around. Not because I had to, because I wanted to,
Right.
It's just such a good feeling. And then I like Miles' character at least as much, if not more, than Peter Parker's character. And they do a great job of portraying him and his family.
Yeah.
It's just, they've knocked it out of the park with both of these games.
It's funny with the phrasing that you use for that they didn't mess with the mechanics, they approved upon it. That calls back to what we were saying earlier about Spider-Man 2, the movie game, and Spider-Man 3. They changed that, do you know what I mean? And they went wrong.
Yeah.
They obviously knew they had the building blocks for a good Spider-Man game with this one, and they built upon that rather than trying to change it. And hopefully when they inevitably bring out a Spider-Man 2, because this is clearly going to be a franchise for Sony. They bought Insomniac Games as a result of this title, so they are clearly going to, they know when they're on to a winner, and that's good for consumers. I mean, that's great for PlayStation owners, because we're going to continue to get great adventures within the Spider-Man realm. But speaking of Miles, obviously there was an animated film that came out during this time. Noah, did you happen to catch Into the Spider-Verse, and what was your thoughts on that?
I love it. It was my favorite movie, a comic book movie of 2018. Better than Infinity War, hands down. Hey, Nas, what's up? So no, honestly, it was my favorite movie of the year, because stylistically, I was actually a little like wary of it, because I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work. Because they did like, I forgot how the technical thing was, but it was like half the frame rate. But they did that purposely to give it that visual style of the comic books kind of feel, and it works.
And it worked.
And it really works. Like and when I saw the trailer, I was like, I don't know if that's gonna work. But when I actually saw it in theaters in IMAX, I actually saw it in the first time in 4DX, and I don't know if you guys know what 4DX is, but it's like, for the audience who doesn't know, it's when your chair moves backwards and forwards in accordance to the screen, and like the sound is like right behind your ear, so like instead of having surround sound like in the entire theater, it's literally by your chair, so it's like a roller coaster plus a movie, best way to put it. And when you tie that into the Spider-Verse with what they did, fantastic. So at first I was like, I don't know how they're gonna play this off, because multiple Spider-Man with Miles, is this gonna work? But dude, it did. And It's I think I said 2018, my favorite comic book movie of the year, hands down.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time talking about that because I feel that you've covered the bases on that one there. But
Yeah.
it does kind of segue us quite nicely into the last part, which is obviously we've now seen all the leaks and the rumours coming about for Spider-Man 3. A lot of speculations coming about that it's maybe going to be a live-action version of Into the Spider-Verse. But what do you think about the casting rumours for Spider-Man 3? What are you expecting? Do you think they're going to add more? I'm going to throw it over to you first of all. Lethal, what do you think?
Dude, for me, man, I want to make sure it is going to be like, the whole multiverse thing. In fact, I'm not even sure. Did they confirm that yet? That it's going to be multiverse? Okay, yeah.
I mean, it has to be, right?
Right. So like to me, that's the biggest thing I would love to see for them to take it to like the next level. What they're going to do to the story. I mean, why not? I mean, we already just had Avengers Endgame not too long ago from this, so it's like them going back into something bigger and opening up the Spider-Verse. And again, we just mentioned how we talked about the Into the Spider-Verse. You're bringing it now to like a live action kind of scenario. To me, it would be the coolest thing ever to see all the Spider-Mans that we all grew up with, to come back. That's my biggest want that I would love to see, and I hope it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to bet we're going to get Toby, Andrew, and we're going to get them all in the one film, and I don't think it will settle the debate of who's the best Spider-Man. I have a theory. It is a theory at this stage, so it can't be classed as a spoiler. But my theory is, if people won't like this, if they bring Tom and if they bring Andrew into this film, I think they'll Toby. I think they'll kill Toby or they'll kill Andrew. I know it's a bold statement, but I think one of them will die. That's just my opinion. Don't know if anyone
I think
else
they could
thinks
get
any
away with
different.
it, so it's not that it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I don't think there'd be any outrage from it, but that's an easy way to be able to kill a Spider-Man and not have people get pissed.
I think if they killed Andrew, there'd be a lot less uproar. If they kill Toby, the
Oh my
internet is
God.
going to explode. So personally, I'd rather they did kill Toby, not because I don't like Toby, just to see it would get a response. Do you know what I mean? And if they're going to make a move like that in a movie, it's because they want an emotional response. And doing it to Toby is going to have much more of an emotional response than it is doing it to Andrew. What do you think of that speculation there, Nola? Do you think that's something we could see happening, or do you think I'm just shooting it way off the mark?
Okay, so just to give you a little history from my own personal research on this, Sony has re-upped with Marvel on their deal to you let Marvel use Spider-Man in their MCU, but again, the same thing happened where the deal like ended, and there was this long spat of like, no, it's their fault, they didn't want to make a deal, blah 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 blah. In the end, I think what's going to happen is they're going to branch off into that Spider-Verse, like multiverse situation, and obviously with the rumors, it's going to happen. And what makes it clear to me is that Sony is going to be using this as a branching off point to differentiate themselves from whatever Marvel and Disney's going to do on their own, right? So they can still use the Spider-Man, Tom Holland's, whatever, but it's clear to me that they're going to continue to do the Into the Spider-Verse Miles Morales storyline. They want to do like a Sinister Six. They want to do these other things, and they're going to use this particular third movie as a branching off point, because now when you start talking about multiverse, well, yeah, you could have multiple Spider-Mans, right? Like we had Toby, we have, so like this to me is like the beginning point of them saying like, all right, we don't want to rely on Marvel and Disney anymore. We're going to just use this as a way to accelerate our other plans. And but yeah, back to your point, Haze Inc. though, they'll probably kill a couple, but then at least to me, when they're bringing all these people back, they're just using them as like specific scenes that needs to be set up in order to further the storyline, instead of like everyone being, oh my god, we're gonna have Tobey Maguire's gonna be in the entire movie. No, they don't have the budget for that, guys. Like it's not gonna happen where he's not gonna be there for 2 hours straight. He's gonna be there for specific scenes. So look, it'll be cool. I'm looking forward to it. I just hope they don't fan service is fine, it's good, but like bowing too much to fan service is also a bad thing. So I hope they find that fine line and walk that tightrope.
Well, seems like an interesting way to end up the video anyway. So Spidey fans, I'm happy to say that this wild ride we've been on with the web slinger just looks like it's going to go from strength to strength. And I personally can't wait to see what the future holds. So thanks for joining me and the rest of the guys at 5ix9ine for this deep dive and look at the history of Spider-Man outside of the comic verse. And I'd like to leave you with the words of the legendary Stan Lee, who without all this, it could not be possible. And that is Excelsior.
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 Excelsior.